All right. If we could, please have a seat. If you all could have your seats we're ready to get started. Welcome to the Tuesday, February 20th, 2018 work session of the Falls Church City Council. Work sessions are a bit different from a regular meeting. We don't typically take public comment, or we don't take public comment, but we do it pretty much any other time. So if you're interested in communicating with anyone on council, we'll be delighted to talk to you. But again, we don't take public comment at this meeting. Before we get started, I just came from the robotics bag and tag meeting, and they asked me to pass out some materials from the robotics team, which hopes to go to the World Championships as they did last year. But they are starting their competition and are starting additional fundraising. So the great team, a lot of hard work, so keep them in mind going forward. Why don't we go ahead and get started with our first item then? Mr. Shields, the Envision Route 7.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. We're very fortunate tonight to be joined by Dan Goldfarb from the NVTC, along with our own Jeff Sykes, who is our lead planner on transportation. And Mr. Goldfarb is going to provide us an update on the Envision Route 7 plan. And Jeff, did you want to make any introductory comments? Then we'll turn it directly over to Dan. Thank you for being here tonight.
When the light's green, it's on. Yeah, thank you. Welcome. Thanks for coming out tonight.
It's our pleasure to come to the commission and talk about this project. We're excited about this project. Our goal is to keep making progress on this project in short steps so that we can fit in with the other jurisdictional plans. A fine balancing act between all the jurisdictions. So I'm just going to give a project update and then talk about next steps, which is our conceptual engineering study. So really with the project, the objective of the project was to provide a high capacity transit solution connection between the Tysons area and Alexandria. Some kind of upgraded transit on that. So the first phase kind of looked at which mode to study. What would be the best mode to have along in this corridor? And out of that first phase came an idea that a BRT or an LRT, so BRT is bus rapid transit and LRT is light rail. I gotta keep moving fast. It's tougher than you guys. Anyway, so we wanted to look at a high capacity transit solution, something that would go along the corridor. So the first question was BRT, LRT, or what if we could increase just regular bus service? We want to look at a low capital. The second question was, we know that we're going to Tysons. Along the way, should we divert off the corridor any? When we looked at that in this phase 2, we found that the connecting to East Falls Church was a very important connection. It really helped ridership. And the other question was, where do we terminate on the southern side, King Street or Marks Center? The city of Alexandria had a lot of reasons for us connecting to Marks Center over King Street. So we looked at both. It seemed that Marks Center could work as well as King Street, provide connections into the West End Transitway, and it also provided you could align with West End Transitway and go down to the Van Dorn Metro. So the three questions that were answered in phase two, that BRT was the best solution. After that, connecting to East Falls Church was really important. That Marks Center was an adequate termini for the BRT. So I'll walk away from my back as time out, but I'll just try to speak to that. So I kind of went into that, what drove the decision and the connection, which obviously is Tysons has a lot of growth, and I think I'd come before and talked about this. You have huge growth in Tysons. Tysons' plan was approved with VDOT under the idea that there would be more high-capacity transit into Tysons. Gallows Road is a corridor that Fairfax County is looking at, as well as Route 7. But Route 7 is really the more important corridor. It has a lot more potential. And when we looked at the ridership, what's important is that We had 18,000 new trips, people that weren't taking transit before, now would take transit in the corridor. So that's 9,000 new people taking transit because you figure they get on, they get off, and they come back. But of that, 2/3 of that were not commuter trips. So this really was a transit corridor that just wasn't commuting. It had the whole life along it. People were using it for recreational trips, for shopping trips. So this would speak very well to a good corridor for high capacity transit. So we finished the phase 2 study. We had public meetings. We published a report. The report was finally published last year in January 2017. It's on our website. We mailed out copies to all of our jurisdictional partners. And we've gotten comments back, finalized it by January 2017. Okay, next step. What we really didn't do, we did a lot of analysis of what's feasible, how would you approach getting funding, where would you get this funding from, mixture of state, local, and federal funding, what are the best paths to take in getting that funding. We've done a bunch of that analysis with phase 2. What really wasn't done was going out and figuring out, well, if a BRT goes in this corridor, what's in the corridor now? How much of the roadway is there? Where are there plans to expand the roadway? How much do the jurisdictions own? And where are there opportunities to help guide decisions in the future? So to give an example, Seven Corners is redeveloping, right? We want to be in front of Seven Corners redevelopment and be able to help Fairfax County decide, well, if we're going to put a BRT through here, what right of way do we have along Route 7? Where do we have plans that we've already purchased right of way, and what could we use for this BRT? If you might have read this week in WTOP talked about Fairfax County today approved almost $1 million to study BRT and roadway expansion in Tyson's Corner. We're working with Fairfax County on that, but this study would be great to have before we got to where Fairfax County is, so we could help guide some of the decisions. In this, we're working with Fairfax County, but we're not in the position to kind of dictate for the rest of the corridor what will happen. Fairfax will set a kind of precedent for Tyson's Corner, and that will probably predict some of how we look down the corridor as far as like median or curve running. But the goal of the conceptual engineering study is mainly to get out there and say, what do we need in the corridor? What do we have in the corridor? Where are potential areas for stops and key connections? And the study's about $300,000. We have a grant from DRPT for half of that money. And then we asked the jurisdictions, Arlington, Alexandria, City of Falls Church, and Fairfax County, for contributions for the other $150,000. And we based that on the travel demand forecast. We looked at boardings, we looked at residents and businesses, who has the jurisdictions, who benefits, and then that 150 was proportioned based on that benefits. So I have it in my notes, but I believe for City of Falls Church it was 23,000 was our ask to help contribute to the study. Fairfax County has a lion's share. I believe it was 75,000 that we asked them for. As contributions go, Alexandria and Fairfax County have agreed to the MOA and have set aside the money. The only requirement that Jeff and I talked about is we expect to get an RFP on the street in the next couple weeks. We were first trying to piggyback on one of the jurisdictions' on-call planning contracts. That hasn't worked out, so we're going back to our original procurement, which takes our counsel to review it and our CFO. That's the process now. Then the RFP will come out. So if I put the RFP out in the next 2 weeks and I get 4 weeks for a response, I would have to decide in about 6 weeks, right, who to award the contract to. I can't award the contract until the MOA is signed by each jurisdiction. So I'm waiting on Arlington and the City of Falls Church to get that So now I have to start over. No, just kidding. You're spared. But so that's why we're here at this work session, to answer any questions you may have about the project and where we're going and concerns about the project. With that, I can kind of open it up.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Questions? Mr. Snyder, you're a representative to NVTA, NVTC, and any other NV that we have. Do you have any thoughts or any insight? Maybe we'll let you start the conversation on our end.
A couple quick things. I think this is a major transit line throughout Northern Virginia, and to have us on it as opposed to nearby, like we have with the rail system, is very positive. I think there can be a couple stops or more than a couple stops in the city. It does not require a dedicated lane. I know that's important to our businesses. It will have a dedicated lane outside in various places, but my understanding is everybody assumes that we're not going to be expanding Route 7, so let's put that to rest. And then we won't need a dedicated lane. The basic route that I think will emerge will be to go down Roosevelt. If you're going west, go down Roosevelt to East Falls Church, then up Washington, turn right on Broad, and continue on Broad with stops occasionally along there and West Falls Church to serve any new development there, and continue on to Tyson's Corner. So there's a real opportunity for people in this corridor to not need their cars and to have a very attractive transit asset added. Anyway, that's what I have. Thanks.
All right, other comments? Ms. Hardy.
Great, thank you for joining us. I agree with Mr. Snyder that I think this is really could be a game changer for Route 7. It's a great example of where the jurisdictions can all work together to do something good for the region. So I'm glad to see it moving forward. From a time frame perspective, I know that this third phase you're estimating to be a year or so.
Correct.
But after that, what's implementation like? Are we
So-
5 years out, 10 years out?
That's a good question. So after the conceptual engineering study, then we would start to probably do a traffic analysis with the environmental work. And then once that's wrapped up, we would start a preliminary design, final design. In that process, we would look for funding streams. The federal space is in flux right now on funding streams, but certainly the NVTA and the authority and their program, their 6-year program, we're in transaction. This project is part of transaction. So it's not in the 6-year cycle now, obviously, because it's not ready to be built, but it could be in the next 6-year cycle. So I would say, you're looking at 10 years till you can walk out of your townhome or apartment and there's a brand new, BRT connecting up the corridor.
And while we're on the funding, I guess part of it, given that you mentioned federal funding for transportation is kind of in flux, as well as just frankly regional and state, given where we are with WMATA. I've only started dipping my toes into the NV world and subbing for Mr. Snyder last week, but does that jeopardize kind of where this could go if we think we need to divert a bunch of the regional monies towards fixing WMATA?
That's a good question. It's hard to say. I mean, this is an important project, and there are pools of money within the state, like Smart Scale, which is from the state, and NVTA, which are designated for new capacity, right? So this is a new capacity route, so it's set up for those streams where that money can't be used for operations. So you can't use that money to go to WMATA because it's not, WMATA is the metro, those are maintenance, state of good repair issues. So there are money streams for this. The other thing is that you have you could look at the 66 inside the Beltway. Certainly part of this route parallels that market and could be open for that as another funding stream.
And then a couple questions on scope. So I noticed in the scope document that West Falls Church Metro was really not in scope, given that it's kind of slightly off Broad Street
Right.
Route 7. Is that something that we should consider, that it could be a really good, important connection between East and West Falls Church Metro?
So we did look at that in phase 2, and I'll first say that Jeff and I talked, and I promised Jeff that NVTC will look into that. It's not part of the scope. It won't be the contractor's work, but we certainly have the expertise to look into it and look at the analysis of travel, shed, and walk time and transfer time and what the demand would be or could be. I will just, as I talk to Jeff, just so you understand that, of recent, the services that have been doing really well, and Arlington acknowledged this. In fact, one of their 66 commuter choice projects was to take out the number of bus stops. That when the bus runs faster, ridership goes up dramatically. And on New Hampshire Avenue in the Silver Spring area, WMATA put in on the K route, the K corridor, they put in the K9 bus, which has been their most successful Metro Extra skip stop service. And in that corridor, ridership went up by 50% in the corridor as a whole. So they not only took some riders from Metro, from the rail, because the bus was operating a lot better, but they created new riders. So we have to remember that each time we divert and we add travel time on, we lose riders. So we want to kind of balance accessibility plus mobility, and that would be the basis of the analysis. And if it turns out that the accessibility outweighs the mobility, then then you want to do it.
One more scope question. So as we think about and consider how technology will change, I know that part of phase 3 that you guys are doing is actually looking at costs and capital investments. I'd like us to think about, how the self-driving technology and electric, buses could play into it, both from a capital as well as ongoing operating costs for the BRT system.
So with the capital won't include the operating estimate, right? So when you think of the bus, the autonomous bus, most of that savings is in the operational phase because you don't have the driver, which is the huge cost of transit, is the labor cost. I think that at the level of detail that we would do the costing, that it'll be more detailed than the phase 2, obviously, but it won't be as detailed as the actual engineering drawings at the time. But we will have some amount of money in there, right, for ITS, Intelligent Transportation Solutions, which might be real-time type of stuff, fare payment, the kind of like where you don't have a card, automatic fare payment, so it detects the people. I mean, that money would be in there for that, and that would probably cover any of the infrastructure that would be required for autonomous vehicles in the corridor.
Okay. Last question, and then I'll hand it over. I think you mentioned this, but is the match required from Falls Church prorated based on essentially how much Route 7 runs in our jurisdiction?
We didn't look at distance. We looked at benefit. So how many riders, right? How many boardings? And then how many of the boardings are resident? How many are businesses? So it was proportion based more on a user fee approach than a distance approach.
I noticed that we were, which is rare, paying actually more than Arlington normally.
Yeah, it touches only in East Falls Church and Arlington, really. A little bit goes through Arlington, but that connection is really important for businesses in the Roslyn-Boston corridor. And that's why Arlington even has what they're paying.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions, Mr. Z? Or Mr. Duncan? Mr. Z? Now, Mr.
Thank you, Mayor.
Duncan.
This is a good step in examining what our transportation options are. We've been talking about this now for quite a bit of time. And looking through this, it says that it'll take approximately a year or so to complete this preliminary study, and this is estimated to be about 10% of the work required to get to the end, and so I'm seeing additional requests come along the way, and so I hate to start down a slippery slope of saying, yeah, let's go and take a look at this, and then we find out that the demand is more. I think that we have a lot of demands on what we need to do in the city. I'm not against this project. I do think it needs to be examined, but do you have a strategy for us with respect to funding the other 90%?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Right now, NVTA money can't be used for studies. It has to be used for capacity projects. Previously, Phase 2 was funded by NVTA. So if NVTA was to change that policy at some point, we could look to them to help fund the design, the environmental stuff in the design. We certainly would look at DRPT funding to do this, state funding to help with it. But I do think that just from my experience that at some point there would be an ask of the jurisdictions for maybe not half to help funding the design, not the construction. For construction, right, the big ticket item of that construction, that's probably going to be NVTA 70% money, which is regional money, right? The region pays in for it, and maybe some state money on that, and if there's federal money available for that. So that big ticket, I think it was it 18 million? I forget, from the numbers get jumbled in my head, but I think it was around 18 million for build, right? The construction cost. That's coming from probably NVTA money, a little bit from federal money, and then some of state DRPT money. For the next steps in the study, let's say there's the next step of traffic analysis and design, preliminary design, which isn't that final detailed design. I would have to think maybe that's going to be around $1 million. I mean, we're certainly going to look to the state for that. Hopefully, maybe some of the other funding mechanisms like the tolling might open up and allow studies to happen. I mean, we're trying to be flexible. NVTC understands probably better than any of the other jurisdictions in regional agencies. What the ask is on the jurisdictions for transit. I mean, NVTC is like the financial planner for transit. We manage, right, the CFO manages the transit money from the jurisdictions. So we know how much of a burden Metro is right now for the jurisdictions, and how hard that is. How much without the fiscal cliff for new capital for buses, we understand how much that weighs on the jurisdictions. So I think we're sensitive to the question. But on the same hand, I mean, if I was realistic, at some point, right, the state would say, well, if you want this, you need to show the jurisdictions need to have some skin in the game.
Right, and so that's actually a big worry of mine. When you say it's regionally funded, I mean that has to come from the region, and we are a part of the region. So in essence, we are already obligated to pay into this. I'm mindful that once we go down the road, that the next phase and the phase after that, we're going to see some really strong headwinds. Well, it's a lot of money at that point.
You're already paying into NVTA, right? So this, I mean, as NVTA goes, right, 70% NVTA funds are collected from all the jurisdictions. So this might be, you'll have to decide at that time if this is one of the projects that you feel is worthy of NVTA funding, or you might have other projects that are worthy of NVTA funding.
Well, we do have a lot of worthy projects. At the same time, I think we do need to know a little bit more about this, and I'm also mindful, again, that 10 years after this study is done, that the whole paradigm of transportation will have changed again. And
we do. Yeah, these are really good questions, and you're correct. We do. FTA had started, right, or the federal government, FHWA had started this. If I'm going to invest in a freeway, you better tell me 25, 30 years down the road that this is a worthy investment. And that still holds true for transit. I mean, we looked at 2040 forecast for developing, is this a viable project? Because with the investment that has to go in, right? If this, let's say in 2040, this had no riders, right? Well, but it had a lot in 2030. Well, it's useless by 2040, right? That's not a good investment. So when we look at these things, we do look out to years 2040, soon it'll be year 2045, to make sure that these are good investments, that they do show benefits.
okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Mr. Duncan.
Well, if you can predict the future that far in advance, I'd like you to manage my stock portfolio. But
Cars are a lot easier.
in the here and now, which is the only thing I can get my head around, there's two things I'd like in exchange for voting for the money to pursue this study, which we should do because, as Mr. Snyder and everybody else has said, we do need to not miss this bus or train or whatever it's going to be. One would be this, going back to what you were talking about, West Falls Church. How about we just, right from the get-go, call the Haycock Road dot on the map West Falls Church? Right now, Haycock Road and the West Falls Church Metro seem like a long way away, but as that area develops the way we want it to develop, that space is going to be much closer. I mean, it's going to feel closer. It's going to feel like, like King Street used to feel. I mean, nobody ever left King Street Station and walked anywhere in the early years. But as that, moved up and became more comfortable, King Street Station in essence became, Western Alexandria. And to me, some intelligent transportation solution will emerge to get people from the BRT at the corner of Haycock and Route 7 and the West Falls Church Metro. I don't know what it's going to be. People get picked up by drones or whatever. Who knows? But let's just call it West Falls Church. That would be my suggestion. The second, mild panic already has broken out about the photographs shown online of what a BRT looks like out there in the big world, outside the little city. And, we're all familiar with that. I mean, down in Richmond a couple of weeks ago, you go up Broad Street and see what they're doing there. I mean, that is one heck of a broad street, and they are tearing it up like crazy. I would ask that we not, let me put it positively. Could we show people a picture of what a BRT setup would look like? A stop, whatever you have in mind, in, the constrained quarters of the city of Falls Church. As Mr. Snyder says, no way, no how are we going to be widening Route 7 in the city of Falls Church. So it would be helpful, I think, just to show that to people, because that would,
Certainly.
calm the early panic. Third, my other request is to our staff, which is at the corner of Washington and Broad, which is going to be, the main Falls Church spot on the BRT. Let's, right now, as we talk with developers inside Atlantic who have properties at that corner, let's make sure that we're doing all we can to build their projects, whatever they may be, in a way that's compatible with whatever intelligent transportation solutions emerge. If you think there's going to need to be a bus stop at the corner of Washington and Broad, how about let's start talking about that now, so that maybe we pull the buildings back a little bit that we're thinking about building, or I don't know, do something so that we don't have to retrofit buildings that we're building in the late teens for a BRT that's going to come, maybe 10 or 12 years down the line. That's not that long. Those would be the three things I would ask. Thanks.
Okay, anybody else have any comments or questions? If not, I've got a few. So just to clarify, I was thinking that the BRT would stop at the West Falls Church metro station itself. Is that not the case?
As we looked at things, it wasn't, in phase 2, it didn't make sense to divert from 7 and go in the Falls Church. That the distance from the station to Haycock was within walking distance. But as I mentioned, I promised Jeff that NVTC will look at that. We'll do a more in-depth analysis, balancing the mobility of staying on 7 with the accessibility of accessing the service along Route 7.
I mean, to me, part of the big appeal of something like this is intermodal. In other words, you can get from one thing to the other to the other. It just seems crazy. It's like having the subway go, like a quarter mile from the National Airport or whatever. It doesn't make sense. Like, to me, you got to punch it in. I don't know if you're aware of the city's plans for 10 acres of development immediately adjacent to the metro station, but the city's intending to build a new high school on the footprint or near the footprint of the current high school, but also develop 10 acres of land, which could be 1.5 million square feet of new development. But as part of that, we're also going to put in, or intend, or hope to put in, a street grid to connect to the metro, so that, for example, BRT bus wouldn't have to go down Haycock Road and loop back around, the station as it would today, but in fact would have much easier access, hopefully with a controlled intersection, so that ingress egress to the station, I think, would be dramatically easier in the future. And so I suspect you haven't contemplated that in doing your analysis of how you get in and out to the metro, because it doesn't exist right now. Right. There is no road from Route 7 directly to the metro other than going through Haycock and then winding around. But it's our intention or hope that in the coming years, as in 4 years from now maybe, there'll be that connection, and we're working on that. So I guess I would suggest to you maybe you could consider that in the future, not just as it is today, right, but as it will be hopefully in the near future. I would say in general, also, I feel the same way actually about Mark Center. Did you say that was been decided, or was that still in play, the issue of where the terminus would be on the...
No, the terminus will be Mark Center.
So it's not going to connect to a metro?
It can align in the service planning. So when you got to actual, like, okay, this bus runs at 9 o'clock, this one at 9 or 7. In that phase, we would look at the possibility of you could stop at Mark Center, continue on the West End Transitway to Van Doren Metro.
Who would continue on the Transitway? The BRT or someone? You just get on
Alexandria
some other...
is building a BRT from Van Doren Metro up and then up Beauregard by Mark Center, continuing down, and then it runs on. It's called the West End Transitway. So this would come into the West End Transitway and provide this connection. So you could have some buses that terminate at Mark Center. You could have some buses that come down 7 and then head north to Pentagon on the West End Transitway, or some that turn south on Beauregard after Mark Center and continue on the Transitway to Van Doren. So this is a connection into their Transitway.
Got it. I got to say, I was out for the same comment, which is, to me, you don't get the intermodality with not going all the way to metro. I know Mark Center. I'm familiar with. I used to play on Mark Center grounds when I was a kid. There's just so many people work there, which is great, but that's not that full connection you get at a metro station. And so, to the extent what I say has any say at all, which probably none,
No,
I would just offer my 2 cents that connecting
Very
to a metro on the other end would be a worthwhile consideration.
It's a very good point. Our decision on that was pressed more with what the residents of Alexandria wanted.
Sure. I get it. I'm from Alexandria. I was born in Alexandria, so I'm familiar with the area. I mean, to me, it just seems like that would be a much better connection, but so be it. So let me ask just a couple more quick questions. Where is BRT working successfully right now? I have personally not had experience with BRT.
If you can get yourself down the Potomac Yards, you'll see the BRT Metroway down there, and that has grown over 30% within the year, new ridership on it. So that runs up Route 1 and then connects in the Crystal City, connects with the VRE, and that's been a very popular service. So in fact, on Route 1 in front of Potomac Yards, it's median running. So you'll see they've set up a median running BRT. So it has its own signals, its own stations.
Who's running that?
Metro's running it, and it's funded by Fairfax County and Arlington. Or Alexandria, I'm sorry, City of Alexandria and Arlington.
How long a leg is that? Just out of curiosity, a couple miles, 4 miles, 5 miles?
Yeah, right now it goes from Braddock Road up to Crystal City, and I think they have NVTA money to continue it up to Pentagon. As far as going south, I think Braddock Road is where it stops. Fairfax County is going north with a BRT on Route 1 that they're planning, but that'll stop at Huntington. There's kind of a misconnection. Maybe in time that connection will come. But that's in our region, a BRT that's functioning. In Pittsburgh, they run a lot of bus rapid transit. The bus has its own lane and it rolls into the city. Minneapolis does a lot with bus rapid transit. Ottawa, up in Canada, really has a pure BRT system where it has its own right of way, and it runs like a light rail system would.
And so, but none of this system that we're talking about today would have the dedicated lane or have like a median?
No, it would. In Tyson's, it'll have dedicated lanes. Whether that's median or curb running is to be decided. Certainly in your city, there's challenges to having dedicated lanes. Maybe there's some spots that as they redevelop, there's area to get that dedicated lane, but certainly there are other spots that are not redeveloping that it will run in mixed traffic at that point.
So Falls Church is contemplated to be fully in mixed traffic?
Unless opportunities, hopefully, my hope would be that this study lays out a footprint, and as some things redevelop, for instance, if there's a big shopping center that redevelops, that it becomes valuable enough for the developer to say, well, I would like this BRT, it provides really good mobility. We could set aside some right of way. We'll give you some right of way for this BRT. But the hope is that this study provides that opportunity, certainly in Seven Corners, Bailey's Crossroad, all the way down to the city of Alexandria. Alexandria is similar to where you guys are, that in lots of areas they've kind of built out. So hopefully this will guide them if some redevelopment comes up, like by the Northern Virginia Community College Nova campus. Maybe that'll redevelop sometime. There'll be an opportunity that this conceptual engineering study will help guide them.
So, but as in current circumstances, would there be a widening at Tyson's Corners and let's say routes at Seven Corners, or are you just contemplating gobbling up one of the lanes that's already there?
So Tyson's is in play right now, right? There's studies kicking off. Today their board approved the money for that study. They're going to expand Route 7 from 6 lanes to 8 lanes. Well, right. So then what is this study that they're doing going to look at? What if you only had 6 lanes and you gave 1 lane to the BRT? Does that provide more mobility within Tyson's? By mobility, are you getting more people to some point faster, right? That's what you want to do. Like, as you're the rider, if you get on this BRT and you need to go from this point of Tyson's to this point of Tyson's, that can provide a faster trip than getting in your car, right? And then that can move more people than a lane of traffic. Then it's worth it to take a lane. That's the type of stuff that their study's going to start to look at.
Okay. Just a question or two about the finances. So I did see, I think as my colleague noted, the proportion that Falls Church is paying is sort of seemed disordinate in some ways. Maybe it's actually based on the formula you described. And is that something that is anticipated usage, or what you would say what's currently there right now today? Like, in other words, you took the number of people who ride a certain bus line right now and say, well, those people who ride in BRT, or did you say, well, this is what it could be? And so how did you come up with that number?
So the travel demand model was used, which is a pretty complex tool for modeling. And that looks at your travel behavior and your travel choices, right? So it looks at from the start of your, what we call the production, your home, to where you have to go for different trip purposes, for commuting, for shopping, for recreation. And it puts through choice models of what you're going to do and where you might go. That model was used just like FTA would do. We took the results of that model and proportioned a user fee, right? And there's areas in the country where California would do this some. They used to do it. Some of the municipalities there, they use that same projection to figure out the user fees that developers might pay as they develop a site, right? So the Seattle area does that a lot too, Puget Sound area. So we use that same type of approach to proportion the funding. So it was based on future forecasts.
Gotcha, but based on the amount of development that currently exists in the city?
No, based on what you forecasted that you would have development by 2040.
Okay, so we gave you numbers that said this is what we anticipate Falls Church will be in 2040?
Yeah, a little more complex than that. Your planners sat down with the region at COG, the Council of Governments, and developed a forecast. Everyone comes to the table. Of course, some forecasts are more aggressive than others. Everything has to balance. So there's some analysis done, some qualitative work done, quantitative and qualitative work done to get a set of regional forecasts, and that's what was used.
Maybe Falls Church is a bit too rosy, given our contribution you just said. So I guess I would just plant the seed or the flag that I know the projects are extremely expensive or can be very expensive, and Falls Church is going to have a whole lot of debt and other capital expenses we're basically incurring as we speak. And so I think you need to be mindful of that as well as far as what the city's contributions are going to be. I did seem the number 23 obviously is not high, but when you multiply that times, 100 or 1,000, you're talking some real money. So I think that's something we'll probably want to spend some more time on as well, and making sure our contribution is truly commensurate and proportionate with our size of our city and our usage. Are there other questions, comments, Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yeah, just your comments. Maybe you want to ask this question. In terms of usage of BRT running down Leesburg Pike and Falls Church, I mean, how many buses do you anticipate? I mean, how much?
So what the headway? I believe in the peak periods it was 5 to 10 minute headways, and then in the off peak it was 10 to 15 minute headways.
I'm sorry, which means what?
Oh, I'm
In
sorry.
layman's
That's
terms.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's the time in between buses. So if you're standing at the stop and you just got to the stop and you saw the bus leave, another bus would be there in 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay. And these buses are how big?
These were remodeled just a standard like 60. The bus you have now, like the buses you see now, they're not articulated. If demand warranted articulated buses, which are about 120 people, you could think about that. But currently in Northern Virginia, none of the jurisdictions run articulated buses.
Okay. So those 60-foot buses coming by every 5 to 10 minutes.
60 passenger, I forget. They're the
60
the
passengers
standard bus you see now, the standard Metro bus.
coming down Leesburg for every 5
Yeah.
to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, anything else? If not, we want to thank you very much for coming out and all the good work you're doing for our community and the region.
Thank you. Thanks for letting us come and talk about Route 7.
I appreciate it.
Well, next we have a briefing for the City Council on the Transit Plaza project and the historic interpretive panels. And the council may recall that copies of these panels were posted in the G corridor for people to read. They were up for a number of months. And so we wanted to provide you an update as to where we've landed on language with a note that will describe the process that we went through to develop the language that we have before you now. And we anticipate that there is room still for further adjustment to it. The committee has worked very hard on this, and it's really important as we curate our history and how we describe our history, and it will be etched permanently in the Transit Plaza there on South Washington Street, that we get it right. And we have a number of members of the committee here tonight as well. Keith Thurston, Ron Anzalone, and Nikki Graves Henderson are here tonight. So we'll let Ms. Janicelli give the report, and we look forward to questions and comments. And one thing I'll say right at the outset, we learned this afternoon that the committee, I think there is still some desire to work on some of the language. I think the thought had been that the committee had essentially completed its work, but we learned this afternoon, I think there is a desire to have some further dialogue. But Ms. Janicelli can describe that, and we look forward to the council thoughts and input as well.
Thank you. And an update on Washington Street Transit Plaza history. Helpful. Just a little bit of background. At the South Washington Plaza on South Washington.
The green light needs to be on.
Okay. Thank you. So we think that this is a good location to highlight the city's history because as a transit hub for both residents and non-residents, and the future transit center can be a great place for tour groups to gather and new visitors to orient themselves to the area. This work on these history panels was done by a working group of city staff and community volunteers that were convened on June 3rd, 2016 by the Deputy City Manager Cindy Mester to draft the text and select the images for these panels. And each of these members represented a specific group and area of expertise, and I'd like to give them credit tonight. Many of them wear multiple hats, so forgive me. Ron Anslow with the Historical Commission, Barb Cram with the Arts and Humanities Council, Kelly Edwards with the Historical Commission, Bradley Jornane with the Library Board of Trustees, Nikki Graves Henderson with the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation, Ed Henderson with the Historical Commission, myself as the Arts and Humanities Coordinator, Cindy Mester as our Deputy City Manager, Keith Thurston with the Little City Catch Foundation, and finally Marshall Webster, our Library Reference Services Supervisor. So I believe that they all deserve a tremendous amount of credit for the time and effort that's gone into these panels so far. And I wanted to share a little bit about our first meeting of this working group. We decided on what our goals should be for these panels. So for the audience, we felt the content should be relevant to residents, commuters, future citizens, and tourists of all demographics. In terms of content, we decided that the content would be the history of Falls Church in chronological order. And the working group did make a conscious effort to represent important women and African Americans to create a more balanced representation of the city's history. And because this was grant funding, the grant funding we received for this project, the text and images would also highlight transportation's relevance to the city's formation, which is also fitting for a panel location at our transportation plaza. The images were selected to complement the text while creating a balance of maps, buildings, and individuals, again, consciously representing the importance of both women and African Americans through imagery. And we also discussed future uses of these panels. So we thought of it as a great location to start historical walking tours, as an educational resource for residents and non-residents, and also just a general reference map of our city. So between our working group meetings that took place over the next 16 months, the individual members had time to update their community groups and research additional information and edit the text using Google Docs. We also did a lot of community, tried to engage the full community from September 1st to September 30th. A draft of the Transit Plaza interpretive panels were shared with the public electronically. They were highlighted on the city's homepage through social media, Facebook, Twitter. We did a press release, and they were also listed in 2 focus newsletters. And we also had them in print in City Hall in the G Corridor, and also at the at the windows in the Kensington building on Broad Street. And so we asked the community to encourage them to share their thoughts on these 8 panels. The city did receive 36 recommended changes from 6 community members, which were incorporated into the final document. Our biggest challenge with this project, we're certainly dealing with the design parameters. So the panels are 8 feet high and 4 feet wide, allowing for 3 sections per panel for text and images that will be etched in glass. And we had a lot of Falls Church history we wanted to share. So certainly much of our work came down to cutting and deciding what items would be placed on these panels. Our next steps, we do have some editing to work still through with the working group to get final consensus. And that recommended final text and images will be included in the RFP procurement documents for the South Washington Intermodal Plaza project later this year. But I am more than happy to take any of your questions and comments, and I hope you had a chance to enjoy some of Falls Church history reading through them.
All right, Letty Hardy.
Thank you. And thank you, Corey, and the rest of the task force in working on it. Really nice job. I thought it was actually really fascinating. I've read parts of it before, and so I thought it was really just fascinating to read. I think I'm going to make it a part of the bedtime story for the boys at some point, so they can learn it. I also did appreciate that conscious effort to highlight both minorities and women, so I thought it was a nice touch. My feedback was more towards the 1960 and kind of going forward. I think 1960 and beyond is what we called it. What are the group's thoughts on inserting either some element of the 2040 vision? Because I feel like we kind of tried to do that towards the end, and the components was, high quality schools, environmentally friendly green spaces, quality housing, small town character, which kind of is mirrored in our vision. And we spent a lot of time talking about the vision. So I wonder if we can pull out parts of the vision and use that in lieu of that language, because I think we spent a lot of time thinking about what those components were, and I don't know whether these 4 encompass all those things.
Yeah, so we did receive the feedback of trying to include that, and that is where that sentence comes from, trying to find a way to include that vision, and also we were trying to not date the panels as well. So that was certainly our final section was one of the ones that we most struggled with, and happy to look at it again.
And I think the thing that was missing for me that's not in those 4 bullet points, it's kind of more reflective in our vision, is the language around evolving. So I think in the panels it says continues to evolve or change, and I think we had talked about the element of vibrancy and how to kind of make it a vibrant and thriving kind of community, and that just didn't jump out at me in those 4 bullets. So again, just feedback on working towards the end. And then I also had questions about the homes chart. So I saw the population in there. By the time that the panels are going to be installed, will we have our 2020 census numbers? And should we reserve space for what that will look like? Or would we be, again, putting up panels that would be old because we were within 6 months of getting census numbers? Looks like. Yeah. That was my feedback. So I'm fine with actually the population one on the left. The one on the right, I think, was just, I didn't know whether it was households, single-family homes. I didn't like it, frankly, that if it's just single-family homes, because our community is changing, and I think it's not reflective of homes, right? Because homes are all types of dwelling units, not just single-family homes, and I didn't want to be biased in that way. Yeah, so both the feedback is on the chart as well as just thinking about the timing of this, that if we have actually our 2020 census numbers, either reserving space for it or making sure that, again, we don't spend money on a glass panel that will then be dated within 6 months, right?
Right. Also with the map and the graphs, we are going to have to wait to see from the contractors on what it will actually look like on glass. And so some of the way that we set up the map will be determined on what it looks like.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
Mr. Snyder and I are agreeing over here, so. Should I speak first, or? Okay, thank you. Appreciate all this work. It's great stuff. I mean, bedtime story I'm not so sure about, but, I enjoyed reading them on the windows at the Kensington one night, walking down. And I understand that the the biggest struggle may have been the last panel. To that end, you know, the good thing about being able to write your history is you can leave out some things. And I think, Mr. Snyder, I'd be okay if we just left out the whole water sale thing. Not really quite sure why it's there, and if it needs to be there, the way it's expressed is not the way I would express it. Fairfax County took over the city's water system, you know. It was a court negotiated agreement, money was exchanged, land. I mean, I would insist that we say that we annexed land from Fairfax County, which will send the manager running out of the room, because we're not allowed to say that. I just as soon not get into all that. Not really sure in the previous panel that, I mean, the water system predated the city's existence by at least 10 or 12 years, so even that reference to the decision along with control over the water and other community interests, I don't know. That panel is okay, but the last one, and in its place, I would suggest two things. One, what Ms. Hardy said, Vision 2040, I think should just be there verbatim. We worked on it really hard. I mean, others worked on it harder than I did, but I thought it was a great effort, and the wording is excellent, and I think it'll stand the test of time. I mean, if somebody looked at that in 2040, hopefully they'll say, gee, those folks back in the teens, they were pretty smart. The only other thing I'd put in is, in reference to the population growth chart, it is significant, I think, and often overlooked that as of 1990, we were a city with a declining population. You know, in this area, a city with a declining population is, you know, 2/3 of the way to being dead. And yet, we pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps, we recruited families, we beefed up the enrollment in the school system. Obviously, we were wildly successful in everything that we did around that time. It's about the time I moved into the city, 1985. I would like us to celebrate the fact that the city has grown from less than 10,000 to, you know, coming on 15,000 in this, you know, most recent time frame. Mm-hmm. So that, in combination with the Vision 2040, to me would be sufficient to, you know, carry the message without having to get into, you know, the development that we've done, the kind of way that we've changed the Falls Church from a suburban, kind of a typical suburban area to a true, you know, urban oriented community. I think that message is conveyed if we just put the vision statement in. But I do think that, you know, indicating that we are a robustly growing city, using those numbers would be useful. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Snyder.
So I have a couple things. I agree with Councilmember Duncan's suggested deletion on Fairfax Water. And in addition to Vision 2040, as kind of a challenge to future leaders, I think we ought to list some of the recognition the city has received. Tree City USA, longest serving. #1 place to live, which we've just been awarded, and date these. And then the a couple of the awards that our schools have made. I think this says that everyone who's come before us has worked very, very hard to produce where we are today, and I'd like this to be a challenge to the future. So just a couple thoughts, and thanks to everyone who put together an amazing summary of a very, very interesting history. You did leave out General Braddock, I think, unless I saw, and there may be a very good reason for that, but the dean of a historical commission is nodding. There was a very good reason for that. So
We had a lot of fun debates in our working group.
Left out the hanging tree, too.
yeah, well, don't mind leaving that out.
All these references have been expunged. Someone's going to ask why.
But I think we do hit all, as I understand it, all the key points and done very, very well. So thanks to everybody involved, but I would add some challenges to the future in terms of the quality of this community right now. Thank you.
Mr. Z?
So I'm going to start at a different place, so just jumping right in and editing. These are going to be glass panels, and they're going to be graphics etched into the glass panels. So I assume then they're going to be reinforced glass panels, and there would be tempered glass as well.
So there is.
I guess the question is, have you done engineering studies of this stuff? And these are huge panels, 4 by 8.
Cindy's
Have
gonna
you ever
join
lifted a
for
sheet
this
of plywood
answer.
in a 50-mile-an-hour wind? Unless these things are protected, I hate to see them snapped off at the base after the first spring snow, windstorm.
They're very, besides big, they are very thick, tempered, protected, and then they'll have protective glass over the etching. And these are very much like the ones that are done in other memorials that we see in DC. So we're using architects that have done memorial structures like this so that they're durable and can survive the different weather.
So you have done the engineering and the studies to withstand.
Yeah, all the footers, placements, the architects' firms have designed all that, and that'll go into the RFP.
Well, it's reassuring to know that these panels will survive, even though the street will be all ripped up in the mornings.
I lose the traffic signal and the bus stop, but they're gonna have major good foundations.
All right, so then into the editing here. I'm reading this sporadically. I think there are lots of good points here. I was not alive in, it looks like here, 1980 to 1920. Some of these things may not be, maybe I'm not reading this right.
There is one,
About
there is
18
definitely a typo on
1880?
the panel number 5.
Okay.
It's supposed to be 1880 to
Okay.
1920.
No, I'm happy to time travel. It's just that I didn't think I'd have to do it tonight. I do think that the 1960 and beyond, by the time these things go up, it will be the better part of a whole century that you've just condensed in one panel here. And I think, where we're going with stuff that we ought to stick to what we already have, which is the vision statement. If you could throw in some more stuff about vibrancy, that we're looking at resilience with respect to survival and thriving. I mean, these words have been brought up already, but to be both economically as well as environmentally sustainable. I think putting an environmentally friendly green space just, quite frankly, doesn't do it for me. The other thing I want to throw in here is that after the Vietnam War, it's not just about Eden Center. We took in a whole bunch of refugees, so it goes to how we try to be inclusionary, not so much as to create a diverse population, but we did our fair share of taking in the Vietnamese population. It's still living here, so I think we need to mention them some kind of way if you're going to be in this 80-year milieu. Okay, so I think others have said some very good things about that and about what we need to go in here. So I do agree it needs more work. And but thank you for it must have been a lot of fun finding all these great pictures here. Don't really get the balloon. Is there a balloon launching site around here somewhere that you found? Oh my goodness.
Thaddeus Lowe and the first balloon launch for signals. Right where your Fort Taylor is.
Is there a plaque on that site?
Yep.
There is. I'm happy to share the whole story with you another time.
It's a great trip to Fort Taylor.
It is a good bedtime story.
Amazing. I live in an amazing city. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Conley.
Thank you for this. One of those 6 people who commented 36 times was me online, so
Thank
you've
you.
already incorporated some of my comments. But so I have a couple questions. One about just where the panels are going to go on this map. Are they all going to be together? Are they going to be spread out throughout?
Yes, so that circle, the gray
Yes.
circle, so they will be in a circle formation in that area. So that was one of the reasons why we wanted to put dates on top, because people could start at different locations. And
Okay.
so we wanted them to make sure people knew where if they wanted to go chronologically, where to start and how to keep going around the circle.
And will they be front and back the same?
They will
Will
be,
it be front-
so each panel, so panel 1 will be on one side, panel 2 will be on
Okay.
another side.
And then are the photos being etched as well?
Yes.
Wow.
And they will be
Okay.
uplit, so you'll see some light at night as well.
Okay. Yeah, right. So I have a couple of little text things here, like where we have religious center. The last sentence says, Falls Church has remained a religious center for many additional faiths, which have coexisted. Additional, just funny. I don't know, many other faiths, many faiths.
Many faiths.
Just there's so
Yeah.
I feel like I have a couple things here that I guess I think it would be good if there was someone who was an editor who looked at all this from an outside perspective, because as all of you have written it, have you had an outside editor? Because it seems like some of the tenses and the wording, there's so much in here that's amazing, but
And one of
Some
the
of it doesn't
problems,
match.
one of the problems was trying to stay within the text limitations. And so
Right.
trying to make sentences that flowed and had all the information we
Right.
wanted, but didn't stretch out
Right.
beyond our word count.
right.
So sometimes we'd have it edited and then it would get changed again.
Right. So it just seems like it's so close, but then I read something and go, what does that mean? So at the end of Trains for Speed and Comfort,
Yeah.
we call the WNOD a bike trail, but we go to great effort around here not to call it a bike trail, right? To call it a multimodal trail or whatever is the proper wording of that. I'm looking at you, Wyatt, because I don't remember what that is.
We can check with Paul.
We can get the official name, yeah.
Yeah.
I understand your point. It's not just bikers.
It's not just bike trail, and this is the Transit Plaza, and we keep calling it a multi-use trail or something. This one called Having Seen Glory with Julia Ward Howe. There's just the extra word of is in the first sentence. To observe of Union troops instead of just Union troops. And then from Victorian age to modern life, this one sentence has the phrase in 1899 at the very end, but if you read it, it doesn't flow right. That little in 1899 should be someplace else. I can give you all these, but.
So we have an editor?
Yeah, she's right here.
Yeah. No, I just think there, and then there are a couple other little things like that where it seems like the word however is in there in a weird place in some of them, or it was closed to local relief. It sounds like it was like the door was closed on local relief, but it was really closed to the relief of the locals. And I'm sure that was squished in there so that it would fit. But as I read it, it just didn't make as much sense. And then the one this panel is called Schools Over Trash Collections. That really just was very jarring to me. Could we come up with a better name for that? Because it just sounds like schools and trash collections are in the same sentence, and they're not.
We'll work on that.
Yeah. So my suggestion is that there's an editor who looks at this so that everything really hangs together. Now that it's so close to being done, and you know how much space you have, it's really just little teeny weeny things in there. And then the population growth at the bottom. The part that's tricky about that, and I'm sure you guys talked about this, is that the boundaries of the city have changed over time. So whoever lived here in 1910 lived in a different area than those who lived here in 1948 or 2000, or so is it really tracking what we want it to track? I don't know, and I'm sure you guys talked about that too. And the same with the homes, and I agree that we should do housing units. How do we lose 200 homes between 1990 and 2000? Did you guys talk about that? How'd that happen? We had 4,668 homes in 1990, and then down to 4,471 in 2000. I don't know. Did we lose some?
We did not discuss
Doesn't sound right.
what made up the numbers, because we
Yeah.
got the numbers, but we can go back. Some of it just may be the type of housing units that are being counted. And
Yeah.
as part of the RFP, we will have the final formal editor, but we are gonna go back one more time with his good comments. And Keith has brought in some editors as well that had fresh reads on this for us. But
I think if there's someone just reading it for
Yep.
verb tense or reading it for dangling participles or something, that would just pull it together just right. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
First of all, I just want to thank you guys. This is fantastic. And as a history undergrad in college, I think this is just awesome. So it is. No, it's great. And I really enjoyed reading the history too. Just a question around the milestones. Were there other milestones that you guys considered other than population growth and homes?
I don't Oh, school.
School count? I just thought it was an interesting choice for something that, you know, a few years down the road will be somewhat out of date. And these things are engineered substantially, it seems like, to withstand hurricane winds, so I imagine them to be here for 200 years, so we're gonna etch the advance in population and home growth. So just not to say that needs to be changed. Obviously, you guys put a lot of work into this, just curious, so thanks.
Okay, I've got just a couple, one or two little things. So, about vandalism, are they vandalism proof, or what happens if somebody, spray paints or something on it?
yeah, there's a clear glass on the outside of the panel on each side, so if a rock or something hits it, that can be replaced without having to replace the full panel. If it gets spray paint and graffiti, that glass should be clean enough, but we can clean it. But if somebody hits it with a rock or something, we can just replace the outer thinner but thick glass.
So there's sort of like on both sides, there's like a clamp or something that holds this second piece of glass on?
Yeah, it's not a clamp per se because it's heat mounted into the base below, but it's designed that if we had to, we could replace it.
Okay. Yeah, I thought this was a real fascinating read. I mean, really a lot of good information, and I thought it was well written as well. One thing, I think I don't have the last sheet here, but I missed the panel on city council. Is there I didn't get to that. So, anyway, no, I thought it was quite good. I really, with that omission, I think it was great. So, anyway, thank you very much. Is there any other comments, Ms. Hardy? Ms. Hardy.
Reference to our local newspaper.
Yeah.
While I'm at it, I mean, we are unique in. Yeah, increasingly we're just unique. It was certainly in Northern Virginia, but maybe even in Metro DC that we have a courthouse newspaper. Seems like it might be worth mentioning.
We started with 64 articles.
Ms. Hardy?
Yeah, one last thought. So as we looked at the layout of this, is there room for a future panel? So if this is really going to be enduring, we may go back in 30 years and add another panel that's the 1960 to 2000, and then they'll add whatever. Is there room in the layout to kind of accommodate?
Within the actual circle and the foundation piece, no, but within the garden beds and the rain garden landscaping piece, we've built in places for additional artwork, public artwork, and so there could have additional panels and text added over time.
Okay.
We are trying to make it as evergreen as possible while still capturing important current history as well.
Sure, come on up if you like.
I was just going to add that there is certainly an opportunity in the future, to take advantage of technology and have a code or multiple codes added either by sticker or whatever the future technology is, so that you can expand the story that's available that way. Whether it's accessible by cell phone or a variety of other means that I don't even know are out there.
Holograms. Holograms, I like holograms.
So before we wrap up, Mr. Shields, can you just give us an update on the whole project, like timetable and the like? Not just this, but the undergrounding, and just real briefly where things are.
The undergrounding, is scheduled to be completed. We're pretty close to completion on that. We're still seeking one last easement that is required from one of the property owners. And once we get that easement, then we'll have secured all the right-of-way, and we go through the federal process for them to do final sign-off on all the plans. And so it is still, I think, 2 years before the final pieces will be put in, and that's largely just due to the federal nature of the funding. And I don't, Cindy, if you'd have any further detail on it.
So I would just add that the electrical power utility part is almost done. Then Washington Gas needs to come behind us. Then we have the streetscape piece, which is the easements that Mr. Shields is referring to. And then, of course, we redo the intersection and the road. And so when we get to the intersection and the road, that's when the transit plaza comes in with decorative artwork and bricks. And then 2 years will be done. The federal process, once we get this design piece done and the right-of-ways, then it'll get reviewed by the feds for FTA funding, and then it goes out for procurement. That's the procurement process that Corey mentioned that these panels are rolled into for the whole transit plaza piece. But we're actively in the ground now, finally.
All right. Yes. Come on. Why don't you come up to the microphone?
Hi. I think I'd like to go on the record to let everyone know that there has been a lot of discussion recently about the direction of the panels and some of the omissions that make Falls Church very unique as a city that have been kind of glossed over or even not included. And I think that Cindy and Corey have been, and the rest of the committee has been in agreement that we do still need to do a lot of work that would make sure that the panels really truly reflect the history of Falls Church in a much more inclusive fashion. And some of the photographs that we have access to were not considered for the panels that you see. And I just want to go on record to let you know that what you see may not be exactly what we end up with. I think you'll be very pleased at what we do end up with by including some of the issues, particularly that Mary Beth alluded to, that and Letty also, that would make our history more powerful and more time worthy, in that the Vietnamese community, the changing face of Falls Church would be reflected. And one of the things that our committee has talked about a lot is giving up valuable real estate in telling our history to people who just passed through Falls Church. So George Washington slept here and that sort of thing. We have an opportunity to talk about things that really are unique and an important part of not only Falls Church City's history, but the region and the country as well. And I hope that we will expand our vision a bit to make sure that these panels truly reflect the importance and uniqueness of Falls Church City's history.
Thank you very much. All right, with that, why don't, sure.
So, Cindy or Corey, what's the timeline? If it's a 2-year process till we're done, when does this have to be finalized to be able to start the engraving and the work on the panels?
Yeah, go ahead. We are looking within about 3 months, putting the RFP out on the process and bringing the firm on, and they will include the artistic engraver that does these panels. Once they're on board, then we'll work out the timeline with them for when, at the point of construction, they'd have to have these done. And certainly when they're bidding on it, they have to have the core of this because that's what they're gonna build their price on, and we can do some tweaking. But we're looking within 3 months, we really need to firm this up. So we don't slow the rest of the project down, nor put the $6 million of federal state grant money at risk.
Okay, great,
We're
thank
gonna
you.
keep working.
All righty, we appreciate all the good work of the committee and you all as well, so keep up the good work. Mr. Shields, do you want to move on to the next item, the RFP?
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to invite Lee and Carol up to the table, if they could. And so we have, we took comments from the council from your last meeting a week ago, and the draft before you reflects those comments. And if I could just kind of quickly go through some of the changes that were made, and then we can open up the discussion from there. So if we start at the front, and I'm not going to take them in the order that the comments were made as we recorded them, but rather following the order of the document. In the beginning, there was a request for an executive summary that states in plain English what it is we're trying to do, and so we added that, and Mr. Goldstein drafted that. So that is new in the document. At section 1.1, there was discussion about the city speaking about redevelopment or being a catalyst for redevelopment on land that might be controlled by WMATA, UVA, and be located in Fairfax County. And so on the top of page 2 of your document, we tried to make it clear, and we did this wherever else this showed up in the document, that we're talking about redevelopment by Falls Church landowners or in the city is where it's referenced elsewhere. So we're not speaking to redevelopment outside of our jurisdiction. Jumping ahead to section 2.1, where the requirements were, there were a host of comments there. One, there's a comment on demolition being both in the school process as well as in this document. And that is true, as we stated at the night. We're going to resolve that once we've determined who can do it most effectively and efficiently for the good of the project. But it's good that right now we have it in so it doesn't become a change order down the road. In the question of sustainability and the LEED designation, there has been, a lot of discussion sort of trying to find the balance of being overly prescriptive and overly detailed versus trying to lay out what we want. But on page 6 and the development requirements, we've described the LEED requirements as environmental sustainability, sustainable buildings that meet LEED Gold or other similar industry equivalents. To put out a marker of what we're shooting for. Now, there are some developers that we've said don't be so specific, say that we're trying to shoot for the really high sustainable standards. There are others that say we should shoot higher than this. That's where the language is right now. Having a discussion of future-proofing the development, as it were, or making sure that the requirements and the desired features get to innovation and thinking about how about trends of the future so that this project will function well 20 years from now and will not be obsolete. And so we've added that in desired features. Provide future-oriented development program that takes advantages of innovations in technology, transportation, and the built environment. And Lee, we had that in another section as well in the project vision or project background. I think we added innovation there as well.
Yeah, we may have, or we may still need to put that in.
Okay.
Where's that, Wyatt? What section are you talking about?
So the one that I just read is in section 2.2, desired features, item E.
Item E.
Yeah. There's a question on 2.1 about affordable housing, and what is the term of the affordable housing? So that's item I on page 6. Affordable housing at a minimum of 6% of residential units at 60% AMI to be affordable for the length of the comprehensive agreement is the term that we have set forward. So what that means is that for the length of the master lease. The question was about should we reference all of the city's typical proffers that are requested, and we did not make a change on that. And the thinking is that we're trying to list in here the things that are important to a developer's pro forma, and so that includes paying for all the infrastructure, the streets, etc., the sidewalks, and all the other language in this document. We don't think that we will likely negotiate a school cap cost contribution as part of the proffers or a parks contribution. And the reason for that is that would be handled instead in the comprehensive agreement and handled directly in the land transaction. Now, it's a worthy debate, but essentially, if you're asking for money for the proffers, then you're asking for it later. And if the project is delayed, or whatever the case may be, that means that those payments would be delayed as well. So we think it would be preferable just to deal with what we need for the school capital as part of the comprehensive agreement and the land lease negotiation directly. If there are school cap cost proffers, those will come out of those will have a pretty direct relationship to the land transaction negotiation. So that's the thinking on that. We can certainly discuss that. And I'll finish my summary here in just a moment. There was a request for more specificity of information about coordination with the school's parcel. We do have on page 6 that one of the development requirements is that the developer address the expectations, in their response for coordination with the schools. It's also included in the introductory paragraph, so we did not add any new language there.
Where is that? I didn't see that.
Or B, or letter B on page 6 under development requirements.
So up at the very top of page 6. There's a comment of stressing the importance of tax yield as well as the upfront payment. And so we did move the paragraph about long-term fiscal impact from desired features into the requirements section. And that was discussed at the meeting. But in the earlier version, one of the desired features was expressed as, which one is, where is that now?
So you said it was moved to
So now it
requirements.
has been moved to 2.1 E on page 5. Maximize long-term positive net fiscal impact to the city through high-quality commercial uses. For these purposes, the net fiscal impact is the projected tax yield plus ground rent derived from ground leasing of the site for the project minus the project cost for city services once the redevelopment is completed. So that was moved from desired to required. There was a request that in the description of Class A office space under desired features, provide metro accessible Class A office space, of adding the word trophy. And we did have some discussion about that, and the consultant's opinion was that the trophy is a very very rare and specific type of office, and that was probably not the way the development community would see what this site. It's arguable, but that was their advice. I did notice that subsequent to that conversation, that on Wheelie Avenue, that they're advertising their office building as trophy office, metro oriented office.
If you ask any broker, there's trophy office space on every metro corner. So there's a bit of subjectivity. I would disagree with our consultants that we should aim as high as possible. And you can pass that along, that they need to reach just a little bit higher, I think. Eye of the beholder when it comes to trophy.
There had been discussion about a special taxing district, and we don't specifically address having a special taxing district in this RFP as it's drafted, and I'll explain why. What we do require is that the developer, what we do is set for the expectation is that the developer would pay for the infrastructure for the site. And so the way that it is possible that a special taxing district would come up in the course of negotiations is that the developer would ask for it as a way to help fund that infrastructure over a longer period of time. And so we think it is something that could come up in the negotiations, but in the document we have not put it on the table as something that we're willing to offer as a way to pay for the infrastructure. So that's sort of the state of play or the state of thinking on that item. But certainly it's an important strategic discussion, and we can certainly have more discussion on that. Those were, I think that's a summary of some of the key comments, Lee, unless I left any out. Lee had kept a good document, sort of a track change of the council comments and what we did in response to them.
There was a comment about reducing some of the requirements to make it less cumbersome.
Right.
So we can maybe talk more about that, but we didn't make any specific changes at this time. We can discuss.
We did do about 2 weeks ago, we did a pretty big scrub, and Bob Wolf had made the comment about trying to make this document shorter and cleaner, and a lot came out from that process, but there were some things that we kept in that we thought were still important information for the proposers to have. But he's made a lot of contributions to this document, but one of them was speak in plain English and keep it short.
Okay, questions, comments? Vice Mayor Connolly, then Ms. Hardy.
So I was doing a lot of reading this weekend with my editing pen, so I just have a couple. But in the project vision 1.1, I think we need to say in there that the project will be located next to a middle school, high school campus, and will be complementary to academic use, or something along those lines. I know we have that in the executive summary, but it seems like it's an important part of the vision is that there's a school right next door, the school campus. In 1.2, the project background, the second to last paragraph, it says this site offers a unique standalone development opportunities, but should that be opportunity?
Absolutely.
Okay. On page 3, in the first paragraph, it says, the second line, it says, will be allowed at an FAR of 4.0. Is that, I wasn't sure what's the right way to say that, or just take that out completely and just say FAR?
I think that's okay.
That's okay? Is that the way you say that?
Yep.
An FAR? Okay.
Yep.
Is my same bike path question as the previous thing in 1.4 it says the W&OD trail. I don't know what it's called, but it has some special name and I always do it wrong.
Let's Google it right now.
And then the very last word of that paragraph is the word alike, which just kind of hangs there funny.
We can stop it at daily conveniences.
Just daily
period.
conveniences, yeah.
There we go.
Regional Park, there you go.
Yeah, but you got to
know what
speak
that
plain
means, though.
language. You just,
Yeah.
plain language is what
All
people are
right.
going to go with.
People won't know that. They think that's going to be some park.
Linear Regional Park.
That's too hard.
Linear Park.
That's too hard.
If it doesn't matter, we'll leave it out, but I just wanted to make sure we're
For short, they
saying
call
it
it
right.
WNOD capital T Trail.
And that's what's here, WNOD capital T Trail.
It's the Friends
Okay.
of the WNOD Trail.
Trail, okay. Then, all right. In this 1.5 where there's preferred transaction process, I know you have dates here in this chart. Is it helpful to have the dates in this paragraph where it says do we want the dates of when this is all going to happen, or is it helpful as someone's reading it? Does that matter, do you think, or having it in the chart is enough?
So for like ERA period to list a date for that,
like
and the different
the city
things.
intends for the selected developer to fund
Right.
due diligence and planning work during the ERA period. Do we want to say 2019 to 2020 or whenever that is? Or is it enough that it's in the chart? I'm going to leave that up to you.
Yeah, can't hurt. I mean, either way.
The only way it could hurt is that if we choose to change the schedule,
Right.
it's on the chart is trying to sort of paint the picture. The words might have more of a legal meaning in terms of
Yeah.
what our commitments are. We just have to be a little bit careful about that.
In that case, don't put it, as I read it, I was a little confused, and then I saw the chart, and I thought, okay, that makes sense that it's in the chart, so it may not need to be both. At the top of page 4, the second paragraph, it says, the selected developer will provide either an upfront payment equal to the purchase price / land value remaining after its initial payment, or begin to make periodic ground rent payments. Now, that's different than everything that we've talked about.
Well, so the first payment is at the execution of the CA. This
Right.
is describing when they take possession of the property 2 years later.
Okay, so this
So this is different, and,
so maybe it would help to have some dates in there.
okay, right. So what that sentence does stand for, though, is that in the CA negotiations, we may want all of the remaining value to be paid right at that moment, or we may accept that it could be paid in phases, and we remain open to negotiation on that point. What we've modeled is 2 additional payments, so
Right.
3 payments in total.
Okay. In 2.1, you've got an extra F under financial and structural requirements. There's a letter F with nothing next to it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And then also on page 5, the financial capability requirements, how do they show all of those? That they have experience with this, or they have $100 million in liquid assets? How does that show up in the RFP response?
Yeah, it could be their balance sheet or their financial package, what they have on cash on hand, investments, other projects they have invested in, or they've attracted other sources of capital.
Is that the kind of stuff that when the proposal comes is going to be in the redacted portion then?
Yeah, that would be redacted.
Right.
Yeah, confidential.
Okay, but that would be available to the reviewers who are on the evaluation team?
Yes.
Right.
Okay. What if the affordable housing policy changes in the next year? We're asking specifically on page 6 for 6% at 60% AMI, and you said for the terms of the CA. But what if we change that policy? We'll still stick with this?
Well, that's a good question. I would think that it would be in the council's mind that we should think that the value of it probably we don't want to change that dramatically. Now, whether the form of it changes, that would be okay. So, for example, if we wanted 5% of the units at 50% AMI, that
Right.
may pro forma out the same way, and that's okay. If we totally change the deal, then there's going to be something else that there'll be a consequence to that, and we should just be mindful of that.
But so right now, it's 20 years, is it not, or am I mistaken?
Yeah.
So you're talking from here, you're already talking, I think, a substantial increase in
Right.
perpetuity is dramatically more expensive than 20 years. So I think this is a major upgrade as
Right.
far as contribution than would normally be expected.
Right, and I wasn't necessarily looking for a major upgrade. I'm just wondering if the policy is rewritten, that this would be grandfathered in. Just so that we have that understanding going
Yeah.
forward, that we're not gonna then turn around and go, oh, wait, we changed that policy, now we want 10%.
Yeah, it seemed from a legal perspective, the date of issue of March 1st is whatever policy is in place, which means even if it changes in the future, they're responding to what the policy was in place as of March 1st.
Well, they would be responding, yeah, based on this document, and they might have their project come in later, but I think as Wyatt mentioned earlier, likely what happens is if you say, well, we now want you to meet the new policy, it's going to come out somewhere else. So essentially, this is going to set what you would get for affordable housing, and you would give something up to get something different later.
Okay, that makes sense. Lee, then further down page 6, there's just a very small typo. It's team requirements. Under Development Team B, at the end of the second line, there's the word "show shall be." That should actually say, like, I think, "who shall be."
Yep.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'm almost done. And then on page 10, where you have proposers should be aware that the city hall is moving. How come we're not actually putting in the new address of City Hall in the RFP? Why does it say check later and we'll tell you?
Well, we're going to plug that in. We just want to coordinate with Jim Wise and exactly how we're going to handle mail and things like that, so. Right.
Okay. And then has this March 14th been confirmed at George Mason High School?
Yeah, we're actually looking at March 15th now, Thursday, March 15th,
Okay.
and looking at 10 a.m.
Yeah,
So we'll
so
put
the
that
high
in.
school could not do it.
I was
And
going to
so,
say, that's a really
um,
busy day.
So we went back to Thursday, which was our preferred date, and we'd shifted to Wednesday on the thought that maybe we could do it at the school on Wednesday
Right.
afternoon. So we've gone back to Thursday, which is the preferred date, and at the Northern Virginia Center.
Okay, so it probably won't be here. Okay. And then further down that page, it says, late submissions may be rejected without consideration or evaluation and may be returned. Why is it may be and not will be? Does that give us discretion, or?
I think it came, I think that language was probably in the old RFPs, and my belief would be that, yes, we do have a certain amount of discretion, that if we had the most wonderful proposal come in and we didn't think it really hurt the competition, we could potentially try to accept it. I think it would be unusual for us to do that, but I think it was designed to give us the option.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
All right, let's go to Ms. Hardy.
Great. Thank you, Vice Mayor, for going through all those detailed changes. One tactical feedback and then more things I think that I just wanted to discuss more generally. For future versions, could we either track changes or redline it? Because it's really hard for me to know what's changed and I know that we probably should read it all the way through, but sometimes I just want to scan like, okay, what are the major changes? So that would be helpful, just tactical feedback there. I know last time I was advocating for kind of getting feedback from kind of a select number of boards and commissions to make sure we get more eyeballs on that. I know the thing that we're trying to balance is to make sure that we don't make this too cumbersome so that it ends up being a deterrent from responders. Like we don't want to put too much detail in here. We want to strike that fine balance. I thought the feedback that we had just gotten this afternoon, and I haven't actually gone through the whole thing, but it looked like it was from a combination of the ESC, the EDA, CACT, Planning Commission, and Tree Commission members. So not officially from those boards, but a pretty comprehensive set of members from there. had good feedback. I haven't gone through the detail of them, but when I read through them at a high level, there were 3 main concepts that I think that are worth discussing, because I think it just has meaning on what we're looking here to do here. So one is the concept of a neighborhood. So instead of calling it sense of place, I noticed very selective language in calling it a neighborhood. That the vision for this is creating a new neighborhood in the west side of Falls Church. That feels pretty different than how we've been talking about. I know sense of place has been advocated for, but I thought that language was worth considering, that it is something that with a live, work, and play component there, it's a neighborhood. So that was one. The second is the language around resiliency. So I think that's kind of the evolution of kind of green and sustainable. So I was part of that panel last Thursday night, which I thought was really powerful. So kudos to the groups that worked on that. But I think using that resiliency language was really provocative, I think. It kind of forces kind of thinking about how to not just be green. And again, I know that we're trying to balance between whether we should just say LEED Gold or whether we should consider the word resiliency. They included a lot more really specific goals that I'm not sure is the right place to include it, but just the language itself, resiliency might just be a good marker of what we're shooting for. That kind of shoots it for a kind of a long-term, sustainable, visionary thing, and not just a short-term, hey, we want to be LEED Gold. I think it's a little more aspirational. And then the third kind of theme I pulled out from that feedback that we got from those groups is the concept of paying for capital projects, not just the high school. The fact that we have a really big lift with all capital projects. And so that's a little different than we've been talking about before. I think the feedback we mentioned last week is, maybe we don't really need to say outright, that it's going to pay for George Mason or need to pay or offset those costs, because anyone paying attention knows that. And what we're really trying to do is create that sense of place, like a really special place on the west side of Falls Church to really take advantage of that opportunity. So I thought that's, again, was another worthy discussion point, is thinking about this opportunity helping offset the large capital program we have, and not just, clearly high school is a big part of it, but thinking about all capital. So neighborhood, resiliency, and then capital. And Mr. Z may have more feedback, but those were the themes I pulled out that I think were important for us to consider in this next draft.
Thank you.
Mr. Z, were you next? Sure.
Sorry, steal your thunder.
Thank you, Letty. Ms. Hardy, there's probably more I could add to that, but now might not be the time for it. There is a fairly comprehensive set of comments, and what I'd like to do is give the city time to react to what's submitted and have you guys take a look at that. Perhaps we could have a conference call on the material that's in there and have a brief discussion on and prior to Friday when the coordinating committee meets, I guess. So I have a feeling the coordinating committee is going to have a lot on its hands anyway. Perhaps you'd like to join us at that time, Ms. Hardy. That'd be great. I do know that the members of the EDA and Planning Commission and others in the city, CACT and so on that have been mentioned, that they have spent a lot of time since last Thursday crafting language, going back and forth. It's not the product of any one person, but it's all of them that's been reviewed. So I would treat the document that you're going to be looking at with the kind of respect that deserves. So, and that's to respond to questions asked about how do the boards and commissions become engaged? Are they going to be asked to take a look at this? What's the mechanism for feeding this stuff back? So the citizens have taken upon themselves to, basically work that, and so that's the product that's in front of you. Just the Thursday session, the one thing that struck me is, and the reason why Michael Stevens from the Wharf Project downtown was invited was in order to create a vibrant neighborhood, a place that people will want to be drawn to, the place where people will want to work at and live. Well, it'd be ideal if we could have a river, but since we don't have a river there, then how do we create a place? And so Michael Stevens suggests the notion of not just one civic plaza, but green open spaces that would have a form and a function, and they would have things that would happen in them. He suggested, for example, in Washington D.C., they save their stormwater and they create. They clean it up and they use make fountains out of it, water features in the summertime, and in the wintertime they create, a skating rink with that water. I mean, it's a way of reusing that resource instead of just treating it like something to be disposed of. So these are things I think that we can think about doing, and perhaps a way of putting that into here. When you talk about innovative, forward-facing, does that convey the notion? I don't know, but I think it should do that. I think there needs to be more emphasis on place-making vibrancy instead of a civic space. Maybe add spaces or interlocking. Well, anyway, you guys can figure out that language. So I think that would mean a lot. I'm really happy that you put it in LEED Gold as a minimum. What we heard from developers is that you need to set the bar fairly high and provide flexibility in allowing them to get to meeting that. There may be some places that will fall short, but in turn they'll do more in other places, and I think that's great. So I think there's a lot of sentiment out there. People understand that when you call for a high environmental standard, that you're actually demanding something that that will add the value in their own project. So I think, what I heard was that they look for these things, and there's no reason why we should not as well demand that from the client side. Also, the notion of demolition, I asked what would be their call, and every one of them answered the question this way, which is that if you can remove one element of risk from the proposer, I mean, there could be stuff in there they don't. So if you give them basically a clear site, then you've removed that risk completely. So I would urge you to think about that. Otherwise, I think this has come a long ways, and I applaud you for considering the stuff that we've put in there, and trying to articulate our sentiments. The last thing I have is I think, for the purpose of clarity, that if you show up at 12:10 and you said, I went to the old city hall and couldn't find a place to drop this off, but here I am, we've been working all night on this, and you gotta let me in the door, boss. I think that's unfair to all the other applicants that actually made it through the gate before 2 o'clock. So I think, as Vice Mayor suggested, the language needs to be fairly clear that, make it to the gate or you don't make it. Thank you.
Okay, other comments? Did you have some?
I did. Okay. So I want to just hit the rewind button for 1 second, because the comments about comments from the boards and commissions and taxpayers and transparency through this. Mr. Shields, can you remind me again why we decided to issue this through PPEA?
Well, I think basically it's a structure that is clear, it's laid out in state law, and we have already adopted policies and guidelines that we know how to follow. And so we thought it was a very clear way to do it, and it gives us the maximum flexibility. But Ms. McCoskey?
Well, I think that's right, but I think it was regarded, and a lot of this came from outside advisors, but I think it was regarded as a good way to essentially be able to make sure we had very qualified people to work with, and then the ability to then get a more detailed proposal from just a few gives them essentially more incentive, because they know they're in a smaller group when there's a really heavy lift in terms of what they have to produce. So I think that was, and then the feeling was through the comprehensive agreement process, we have a lot of flexibility to reshape things based on proposals and based on what we want.
Okay. Yeah, I had heard some comments that, PPEA for the school purposes or infrastructure would, certainly make sense, and I think that was the reason that it was drafted to begin with. But for a commercial development, There was some concern over transparency around the specifics related to the development, and that there could be, potential pushback from folks in the community that maybe felt that they weren't getting the level of detail that they wanted. I spent some time reading through the PPA Act, I think it was 2002, and I didn't see much mention of commercial. I mean, it really seemed to be focused on educational facilities and things like that. So just asking for guidance in that regard. I know that it provides structure for us and, gives us some guidance and templates, but I want to make sure that we're not going down a path where once we issue this RFP under a PPEA, that we limit ourselves in terms of the details that can actually be provided to the taxpayers, just specifically around this particular type of structure.
Yeah. I will say that was the first question we asked as we embarked down this path, and part of the thinking too was, that this is a very clear, kind of well-traveled legal process for us to undertake what it is we're trying to do. But
So I had similar concerns about, frankly, the confidentiality and how much we can share with the community, because that was the perception with the last PPA, was that we couldn't share a lot, and people didn't like that. And I think my understanding from discussions with city manager, city attorney, was that regardless of the procurement process, we might be subject to that same confidentiality requirements, just because that's how the process can stay competitive.
Well, I think that's right. And I was going to say, I think that it isn't the PPEA that inherently says you have to keep things confidential. The requirement, in fact, and when we put this out, we require that the developers identify what is confidential because it's a trade secret or financial information or something that is going to make the hurt the competition basically in the process. That's where the confidentiality requirement comes from. It's not something in the PPEA that does that. So the PPEA doesn't really affect transparency, but for a normally competitive process, one would have when you have a procurement process, normally it's not done in public, it's done and documents aren't available to anybody until after award, when you've compared all the projects. But because of the special nature of this project, we're trying to do more in the open. And I think we will be able to do a great deal at this point, save the financial information, because this, without the structure of the project, that is how you do the school and the development that was so critical last time in terms of competition, this will be, because it's a more of a single item type procurement, there are going to be confidential financial information, or there is going to be confidential financial information, but I don't think there's going to be as much of what is proposed will have to be kept confidential to preserve the competition.
But we're sure of that.
Sure of
in
what?
In terms of the transparency around the details related to the development. Because what I don't want to do is you issue the RFP, it's awarded, and then someone says, well, technically through PPEA, the specifics around this are confidential, so we can't have these discussions out in the open.
Well, and to a certain extent, we evaluate that, and if we determine that what they're trying to keep confidential doesn't need to be confidential for the competitiveness of the process, then we would discuss that with them and tell them that if we don't agree that it's going to be confidential, they would have an opportunity to withdraw their submission, but we would have to agree that it's confidential before it can be kept confidential.
Okay. And does this PPEA process extend beyond the awarding of the actual contract once we get into the agreement itself?
once we've picked a top-ranked respondent, then that's when it becomes much more public.
Okay.
It's when it's an actively competitive process that you just naturally need to protect the proprietary information, the ideas that they're coming forward with on how they're going to make this work. And I think in terms of expectation setting, though, I mean, I think it's reasonable to expect that a lot of the development program is going to be confidential until the ranking process has happened. I mean, it's if you're putting in a proposal and you want to win it, and it's still an active competition, it's not really fair to have the other guys see what you're proposing and then maybe try to steal some of your, if you've got an inside track on some tenants that can make things happen, or users that can make things happen that that are part of your proposal, that is going to be confidential until later in the process.
And
But the key parts of it is that, the top ranked is going to have to go through a very public entitlement process, and the CA negotiations will be, that probably the negotiations themselves will be confidential, but it's very quickly those negotiations will go public. And the terms that they've offered in their proposal will be public once the top ranked is selected as well.
Okay. I mean, as long as that's been looked at in detail, I just didn't see a whole lot of mention of commercial inside of that agreement, which made me think that there was a reason. So just a couple other things. In terms of that special taxing district, can you explain to me why, you had mentioned may want to use that as a mechanism to pay for infrastructure, but my interpretation of our discussion around a special taxing district wasn't necessarily focused specifically on infrastructure, but was focused on generating additional revenue. Could be to cover additional unexpected costs related to Metro, could be related to transportation costs relevant to the site, could be related to a number of things. Is there a reason that we've kind of taken that direction of the lever that you talked about in terms of using that as the ability for someone to pay for the infrastructure? I thought that was an interesting comment. I had not heard that before.
Well, I think generally they're usually with the special taxing district, there is a nexus of the development and specific capital improvements that are happening with that development. So meeting sort of citywide general fund obligations would not be a typical use for a special taxing district.
Mm-hmm.
But we've, that's our thinking on it.
And I think that's right. Special taxing districts are usually districts where you've created a district and you've taxed that district because they're getting the benefit of some particular service. And when you have a general,
like being next to Metro.
it could be like being next to Metro, but it wouldn't be like the high school for the whole city. So until we have an idea for what we want to use that special tax district for, I think it's sort of premature to put that out there, because I think the city's expecting right now, the plan is that the developer pays for that infrastructure. And so they could ask for that special taxing districts. And there may be other mechanisms we can find, but the tax districts that are allowed within the code generally are for a specific purpose that applies only to the area.
I think we need to think about that, not necessarily for this conceptual, but certainly before folks get into the details of underwriting a deal like this on the detailed side. This is probably the best chance we have to help offset some of the anticipated costs that I certainly expect to balloon from Metro. And this site, more than any other site in the city, is going to benefit from its proximity to Metro. And so I think we need to seriously consider that. In terms of, sorry, I'm a little under the weather, not quite as energetic as I'd like to be. In terms of sustainability and resiliency, I will say the comments that I've gotten since last meeting from citizens and voters here have focused almost exclusively on sustainability and resiliency. And I would echo Mr. Z and Ms. Hardy's comments that we may not need to get into the specifics about how we treat gray and black water and how it's incorporated, but I think, some comment potentially into on page 8 is kind of where I had penciled that in under desired features, also where I had recommended the word trophy. Potentially under I'm going to tell people out there we want trophy, whether it goes in there or not. So, something to the effect of, contemplating resiliency and sustainable design and energy and resource usage. So not so specific. And I know it may sound like we're beating this idea into the ground, but I think it's incredibly important. So I was just out in San Francisco last week, which is why I missed that ESC panel. And one of the panels that were out there was specifically on resiliency and sustainability. And some of the things that people are doing at sites that are even more constricted than what we're doing are just absolutely incredible. And I think that this is a chance, again, to do something that resonates with the values of the city. And this continues to come up time and time again, whether it's green space, sustainable design, resiliency against climate change, resiliency against, things beyond climate change. I think it's important for us to have that comment in there, even if it is somewhat broad. And that's just the section that I had keyed in on. And then a specific question related to sustainability and LEED. Again, I was happy to see that LEED Gold was put in there. Should we be asking for, within the design team, for whoever the folks are on the A&E, that someone be LEED accredited to, both design and then new construction ground up? I mean, should that be something that we require, which just kind of further reiterates this idea that, we want this focus on sustainability?
I have to say, just sort of my own development experience, practically everybody's got somebody, any major architecture firm is going to have.
Yeah, that's
there's lawyers that are LEED.
been my experience too. I don't think it hurts to put it in there, but yeah, I would agree.
No, I completely agree with that. And in fact, the two instances in the school RFP, they specifically call for that kind of experience. So, and it's also reflected in the kinds of things that the submission from the ESC and Tree Commission, they've named it for that skill set.
And then last two comments. Under 1.2 in fourth paragraph, there's 2 periods at the end of that paragraph. Ms. Connolly may have picked up on that one. I was having trouble keeping track of all the changes.
You missed it.
And then not to beat this into the ground any more than it already has been, but I did notice in the school's detailed RFP that they issued, they were specifically asking for someone, and Mr. Anderson's back there, maybe he can correct me if in my haze of sickness I missed this, but that they were specifically asking for the demolition of the school in that detailed RFP. And I know we want to provide flexibility, I understand, but in light of the detailed RFP coming from the school, specifically asking for the demolition of the existing George Mason, do we need to revisit that, especially with discussion over eliminating risks? Does it make it more attractive?
Well, not only that, but part of that risk is this development may not light off for a while, and no one wants to be responsible for babysitting.
I was just going to say
vacant
babysitting.
school, right?
Yeah, I feel like it keeps coming up, and I feel like it's something we should make a decision on. I understand why, but it seems like we're asking the folks who are building the new school to take that on, and that's in the RFP. So maybe it's something we should just move on. So that's it for me. Thanks.
All right, other comments?
There's only kind of one thing, and I guess it could apply for both the high school builder or the developer. But you can get a lot of, in terms of sustainability, the reuse of the building. So in a major demo like this, what you can have is a situation where they're chewing up all the concrete, and these piles of concrete that are going to be reused. All the old brick runs through a grinder, and it gets reused either for fill or for whatever reasons. So who's best to manage that? I think we're probably going to see that happen on this site. So it's a question of the timing of who's doing that. So what we may end up with is piles of broken up sidewalk, and that's the site if the high school team does that. That's just I think we're leaving it out there hanging. It is double counted. I think we can make a decision on it. There's just a few things we need to work through on it.
Yeah, I'd find out maybe from a developer or someone, there are lead points you get for some things, for other vice versa. And so that's, I think, the main consideration. There is risk. associated with having a building, what the heck's in it. There's risk of what's under the ground. I mean, you could demo the thing, there still could be stuff underneath the ground that's a risk, but at the end of the day, it really is about managing and mitigating risk. But I think maybe a little bit more input. Bob Wolf was a developer. I don't know if he's given you any insight or thoughts on it.
Yeah, let's get a little bit more homework on this and see if we can make a decision on it.
Just on that one, I think the school board's main concern on that one is just that they were concerned that there would be an empty building sitting there.
An attractive nuisance. And
Exactly, right, that the new school would be built and then we'd have that there for longer than we'd want until the,
or even more horrifying, we might start storing things in it.
oh, right.
Historic site.
So I think the intent on that RFDP was just to make sure that it's gone as quickly as possible.
All right, what other comments do we have? Mr. Snyder?
Thanks a lot. As I recall, the last effort at the RFP was abandoned for two principal reasons, and Councilmember Litgenhouse mentioned one, which is an absence of information to the public. And the second one was there was too much financial risk to the city, even with the development. So I want to go back to the issue of financial risk and remind everyone that the major reason why we're doing this is to create tax revenue to offset other city costs, especially the high school. So as interested as I am in pushing the envelope on sustainability or whatever other values are there, if in our zeal to do that, we significantly reduce the universe of potential developers and significantly reduce the capability of earning a lot of money from this site, in my view, it'll be self-defeating. So I don't disagree with any of the comments, any of the suggestions, but I have to go to the experts and say, have we loaded this up to the point where we're going to be discouraging a lot of people that we really want at this stage? We want a lot of serious developers to come in at this stage. And I fear that we're moving into an area where we may be loading it up with so many requirements that we're going to be eliminating developers that we'd really like to start to work with. So again, I'm comfortable with all the language that's been added if the experts tell me that we haven't inadvertently dramatically reduced the universe. Secondly, we seem to be driving to a particular model. I don't have a model in sight. If someone came in with a hotel, entertainment, and office site that met our economic conditions, I would be perfectly happy with that. I would also be happy with more height and more FAR that we're talking about if that will generate the kind of tax revenue that we need. We cannot afford to build that high school without a huge contribution in tax money from this site. So this is just a request that as we move forward, that as we add things, as we add specificity, that we do not lose, A, the possibility of spreading this net very wide and coming in with a kind of project that none of us has any idea about. But if it turns out that it meets our community values and, most importantly, it generates the kind of tax revenue we need, then I would like that to be considered, even though it does not fit into anyone's model of what they're thinking about at this point. So from my own view, that's what I ask everyone involved, whether it be the council, our expert consultants, our staff. There's a lot of expertise here. Please let's not lose sight of the fundamental issue that we're trying to raise a whole lot of tax money from this site. That doesn't mean necessarily that we have to sacrifice other values, but I don't want to lose sight of that. So that's the only comment I want to make tonight, and I'm going to have to rely on the experts to say how far down the road in various areas can we go without dramatically reducing some potential developments that we have no idea in our mind right now might generate a huge amount of tax revenue and might actually be quite interesting. End of comment. Thank you very much.
Mr. Z?
Well, Mr. Steiner, I wish that you could have taken the time and effort to have attended last Thursday's meeting. It was standing room only, and it was quite refreshing to see world-class developers and others that said, "Hey, listen, we all understand what it is that you're asking us, and let me assure you that the people you want to, the quality developers that you want to propose on this site are those that that understand this and want to bring that to you, because they know that if they create a special place, they can charge 30, 35, 40% more per square foot. That it'll draw the kind of people that you'll want to spend money, go into special retail kinds of places. It will, a high lead facility will not only result in lower operational costs, but things like a lower insurance costs, and there are special kinds. There are people that are willing to pay for that kind of stuff just to be here. So I offer that in rebuttal to what you just said, which I think is saying, let's just throw it out there and see what comes. So someone wants to offer us a baseball stadium, I would be the first to say that's not going to happen here. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to rise to that. My comments were simply that we not lose sight of the financial role here, and I'm not going to rise to the personal attack that was made just now, because I think
That
it's
was not ad
unjustified.
hominem
So let's
attack. I just
end
said
it
I
right
wish you
now.
had been there. That's all I said. You should be mindful of what was said instead of what you thought you heard, Mr. Snyder.
I didn't make any comment about that session at all, and I think I know a little bit about the environmental issues. Thanks much. Anyway, let's move on. Thank you very much.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments? I have a few, if no one else has any. Let me go ahead and give you what I've got. If I, did you have some, Mr. Duncan? I'm sorry. Okay. So this is on the top of page 4. It's a previous discussion about payments, and I think we ought to keep the flexibility. There's all sorts of income streams and ways that people can pay us money that may be good for us. And we have different borrowing powers as a city, and there's a lot of different things at play here. So anyway, I would try to keep maximum flexibility as relates to payment options. Secondly, it seems to me that the word comprehensive agreement is sort of a misnomer. I think in some ways we're using it as the ground lease, are we not? But I don't think intuitively a developer who reads this is going to say comprehensive agreement means ground lease. I think they would think there's some kind of development agreement that prescribes what you're going to do there, but not necessarily for the next 100 years or whatever the term of a ground lease would be. And so I guess I would just say in my reading of this, I'm confused. When I see comprehensive agreement, I don't think ground lease, but then I know what's intended, and it seems to me that there's a little bit of confusion with the terminology. I think we ought to try to figure out a way to make it more, whether we use different terms, ground lease for one thing or whatever. But if someone did an outright purchase of this property, the comprehensive agreement would come and go in a couple years, right? It wouldn't be lasting forever. It would be, your approval, your land use approval might last forever. But anyway, to me, that's sort of a misnomer. I think it's confusing when I read that in here. Also, this is on page 5, midway down, this financial and structural requirements. I appreciate that you moved up some of this tax yield discussion a little bit closer up, but I think I still have the same point I made earlier, which is, to me, tax yield is probably more important than your upfront payments. To a developer, I think they would not view that. 99% of the deals a developer does are going to be, how much money you give me? What are you paying me for my land? And so this is a very unusual circumstance, in my opinion, for a typical developers reading this. And so we've mentioned projected tax yield, but to me, that doesn't even really capture what we're looking for. Tax yield probably people would think of as property taxes. And so I think it'd be good to have a statement maybe as a projected or comprehensive tax yield with maybe a parenthetical that says such as property taxes, sales tax, hotel and restaurant tax, B-poll tax, just to give a full flavor of the broad range of taxes we're looking to maximize and that we will quantify. I think having a statement in here as well that would use our fiscal model somewhere, which I don't recall seeing, is the fiscal model? A fiscal model which contemplates all these different things somewhere in the front so people get a flavor of what they're aiming for. You know, if they think the target is midway up, that's what they're going to aim for. And I think our target is very subtle and comprehensive and not intuitive to most people who are going to read this. And so I think we need to spoon feed it to a developer. They're going to get the wrong idea of what we're looking for. And again, just in my own experience, my own universe, I would think upfront payments is really what people are talking about. And so even the tax shield concept is very broad and much bigger, I think, than people would think. And so I think a statement of what kind of tax shield specifically we're talking about, and then a statement in here, we'll use our fiscal model to analyze proposals, which contemplates all these different things, I think is helpful so that people get a flavor of what we're really looking for, because it's so much broader than what I think people would think intuitively. With respect to neighborhood, I'm not averse to using that in here. I wouldn't want to replace sense of place. To me, a neighborhood connotes mostly residential, and I think we're looking for something much more a mix of uses than a residential neighborhood. And so, again, I'm okay using the word in here, but I don't think it should replace sense of place. Also, I would make the comment, too, about not being too prescriptive. There are a lot of really good ideas floating around, and I think they belong in here, but I wonder to some extent whether they belong in an aspirational section or things we'd like to see but not demand. You know, we don't prescribe a certain percentage of tree cover, for example, and I don't know what the things are. We want to say this is something that's a prescription and this is something that's an aspiration. But I do think we want to have maximum flexibility in this document because I am afraid that some people will say, well, geez, I can't deliver that one aspect that may be important to us, but maybe a trade-off. You know, this whole project is going to be a series of trade-offs. It's going to be a mix of uses. It's going to be some things are really good up front, but not as good in the long run. Some things are going to have a great, you know, outdoor space, but maybe not as many trees as this other proposal. And so at the end of the day, we're going to have to put our arms around what each proposal is, and then weigh the checks and balances, you know, the pros and cons. And so I think up front in this first go, we really ought to be as flexible as possible so that we get the maximum number of bidders. And then we can flush them out and gravitate towards the one that meet our goals that are stated, again, I think more broadly than prescriptively. And so I would make that as a comment as well. Let's see what else we've got here. So on this desired features 2.2, they say desired features are shown in descending order of importance. I'm not sure personally whether we need to do that. For example, number 2 is a Class A office, and number 3 is a hotel. I think a hotel is dramatically better financially for the city than an office is going to be on a per square foot basis. If you're asking me, my descending order, I'd put a hotel before I'd put an office for a lot of reasons. It creates meeting space, brings visitors, tourists to our community. Irrespective of that, I'm not sure we need to put them in descending order. To me, we just state what our desired features are and let them kind of come to us with what they propose. Let's see what else I've got here. I think that's about it.
Is there such a thing as a trophy hotel?
Yeah, that's right. And I would agree with about the red line, you know, seeing red lines. It's really hard to look through this thing and figure out what the heck's changed without a red line. So anyway, that's about what I've got. Are there other questions, Ms. Hardy?
Just one closing thought. So just reflecting on kind of all the feedback you've gotten. I know there's a lot of it. It's hard to manage by committees for something like this. But I would encourage you that, because we all share the same goal that we ultimately want to maximize value here and we don't want to deter responders. And so it's not necessarily adding all the feedback in there because more language is going to make this thing clunky, but how to find that kind of more elegant language that captures what we are talking about, whether it's using neighborhood or resiliency and doing it in a way that keeps it clean and elegant without, again, burdening. So I know it's hard to collect all this feedback and then distill it, but we appreciate the work involved.
Mr. Z.
I would agree with that. I associate myself with that remark that we need to be lyrical in putting forward the aspirational things, and I certainly agree that the flexibility is key in getting the right developer. And in the last 2 or 3 months, we certainly have come across a whole list of these people that are eminently qualified, and you know, we want them to show up. And we want them to be interested, so there is that. I'm wondering, and kind of thinking out loud on this, is there some way of capturing what, even though we have not yet made a decision on a special taxation district as a council, that this is not perhaps the time to put that in there expressly, but is there a way of teeing up the notion that that may be coming in the next RFP, that, special financing mechanisms can be suggested, will be considered. I don't know how you want to word that. I don't even know whether we want to do that or not, but at least it won't come as a surprise downstream that, we want to overlay tax district.
I think a place for that could be is in section 4.7, the financial approach. And we leave the door open to that, but we don't reference it specifically. And so I think we could put the words in there as in parentheses, such as, through a special taxing district to pay for specific improvements or.
I'm not the expert at this, but, Ross, you've seen a bunch of these things. I know you have as well. Also, Mayor, have you, where there are these asks, what stage of the process are they insert? Are they insert up front or just downstream, or just the two-step process where you kind of hint at, that desire and then you firm it up at the end with the 3?
So, I guess what I would just say is, I personally, my clients don't typically respond to these, or I have not been involved in a lot of RFPs, to be honest with you. I think it's a fairly rare animal. Most developers probably prefer not to go through this process. Most developers just like to buy a piece of land, control it, do what they want to do with it, and then the locality is the one they're dealing with, as opposed to kind of competing with everyone else in this public process. That's why I think, just my own experience, that having things as aspirational and not, too prescriptive, I think will get the maximum amount of people involved in bidding on this, which I think at this stage is probably what we want to see, is a whole lot of competition, and then narrow it down, and the next go, put in more things that we have kind of filtered through, having seen this once before with the first round of people. So, that's just sort of my gut feeling, but I don't normally work on RFPs.
So my feedback would be yes to all of that. We do not want to be tightly prescriptive on this because we do want to attract as many bidders as possible. My response in terms of how it relates to taxes, I do a lot of state and local tax budgeting for folks looking at development and acquisitions of property. And what I will tell you is that they want to know the playing field as early as possible in the process. Now, because this is a 2-stage RFP, does it necessarily have to be in the conceptual versus the detailed? No. But I would say that if we're going to signal it, even if it's in a very kind of broad way, we should do that as soon as possible, because the first question, if they go through the underwriting, and because this is conceptual, they may not get as detailed into the underwriting, but 15 cents on a tax rate for a special taxing district, that can affect cash flow, and it can affect the decision on which types of assets you pursue. Could that additional tax be passed through to your tenants versus hitting the bottom line, which is office, it would be passed through, multifamily, it would go, straight to the bottom line in terms of cost to the developer. So I don't know if that answers your question, but they want to know the playing field as early as possible so they can at least try to plan, even if it's broadly, and ask the question in conversations with the city as to what's this mention of a special taxing district? Well, we don't really know. We just know that we're trying to maximize value and generate as much revenue as possible, and it could offset transportation, and then you get into a discussion about the range potentially. I think we should signal as soon as possible, but I can't say by putting it in the conceptual you're limiting yourself, so to speak.
I guess what I'd like to know, with respect to taxing districts, maybe the city attorney can help us with this, is what taxing districts would be applicable or could be applicable to this site, and then what are the restrictions on what the proceeds would be used for. And then lastly, maybe for the city manager or the economic development office, is what kind of revenue we're talking about. So those are, to me, kind of the big questions we need to know. If it turns out you can only use it for some purpose and that purpose really isn't applicable here, that's one thing. If the amount of revenue we're talking about isn't that much, then that's something else. So anyway, those are the kind of things I'd want to get my arms around before I would feel comfortable proceeding one way or the other. I think it's a great idea, something to be considered. But to me, I'd want that information before I'd be able to make a decision.
Well, I can put together something like a chart of the types of special taxing districts that are out there. But essentially, there's a broad range, and some of them can be used for many, many purposes. The usual purpose for the tax is to pay off debt to undertake a particular project within that area. And so the tax isn't usually just building up a fund. It usually is assigned to a particular debt. And that's, I think, part of the issue of putting it in here. We might reference it, but I think that at this stage in particular, without knowing what we're going to do with money that the tax would be used for, it's hard to provide much of an upfront picture of what a tax district would mean to the developers, because we don't have a particular thing we're looking at paying for and then taxing them for. But I can get a chart out to you all that gives sort of some of the types of districts and the types of.
But I mentioned state law is prescriptive. I mean, I'm sure there's not unfettered ability to just tax a certain portion of your town, right? I mean, there has to be a specific purpose.
Well, that's
And so-
right, and usually, and that's how usually what you do with a special tax district is you have a project you want to do, you bond fund it, and then you pay it off with those taxes. The taxes, you don't use a special tax district just to raise additional general fund money. It's used to pay for a particular item that benefits that area.
So you're saying in all circumstances that's the case?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and there's a broad range, though, of different kinds of things you can pay for. There's a broad range of types of things you can use that money to pay for, but they all would fall as benefiting, in particular, the area that is the special tax district.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yeah, so one of the comparisons I would ask, or the research, so in Tyson's you have a Dulles rail tax. They have a phase 1, phase 2. And within the context of paying for debt related to bonds, it may have been the contribution by Fairfax County for those particular Metro stops that went through Tyson specifically. I keep mentioning Metro as part of the special taxing district because my understanding is, we have increased expenditures, but there is also additional debt that's being put out there on Metro for capital improvements, if I'm not mistaken, related to the system itself. Is that right? So I look at this as, again, if it's specific to transportation, I would ask very specifically that we look at that because this site will benefit from proximity to Metro more than any other site in the city. And Metro right now's funding is an absolute mess, and if we want to provide ourselves with a backstop related to those rising costs, whether it's debt or just operational with Metro, that maybe that's what we contemplate using this for. So, in terms of our research, I would look at those special taxing districts in Tyson specifically related to Metro.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I guess I would just say that if it's required to actually pay back a debt, like Fairfax County paid for expansion of the rail, which we're not doing, then I guess we want to make sure there's a underlying legal basis for us to impose a tax. Okay. Are there other questions or comments about the RFP, Mr. Snyder?
Just, I'd like to associate myself with the comments from Councilmember Hardy and Z most recently, and the mayor, I think we've got the right balance here, so I think we should move forward.
Vice Mayor Connolly, sure.
Mr. Shields, once we get responses to this proposal, will the evaluating committee have a chance to talk to any of them, or will this be just a review and then shortlist? As we talk about some of these things and we're talking about creative approaches, I'm wondering if there's a need to talk to any of the proposals as they come in to make sure they're meeting what we want, or that doesn't happen at this stage.
Do you want to answer that, Carol?
I think that there's some possibility, but if you wanted to talk with people, you'd want to make sure that everybody had the same opportunity to give input. I mean, I think that in past cases, we've had some follow-up discussions, but we've had, the same questions addressed to each of the groups so that we got the same information. I think we'd want to consider, especially at the conceptual phase, whether the decisions we're making, which are to a great degree based on qualifications and experience and things like that. And so I think we would want to rely primarily on what they've given us. But something might come up that we find we want to get additional information from everybody, and we'd have to deal with everybody the same.
Okay, is there any other questions or comments about this? If not, why don't we move on to the last portion of our agenda? Any council comments, calendar, scheduling issues? Mr. Duncan?
The Economic Development Committee of the council, Ms. Hardy and I, which normally would meet this Thursday, is going to meet Thursday, March the 1st. The manager says that most of the staff that needs to be there can be there then, so I've asked the clerk to publicly notice that instead of this Thursday.
All right, anything else? Ms. Hardy?
Sorry, I do have a number of things. First, just feedback on this. This looks excellent. I was joking partly with Mr. Lickenhouse. It makes me want to live here because the language in here is really good, and I think it makes people really excited about this opportunity. So nice job on this. I don't know if this is this final version. Cool. If we can make a few available for the community, just for them to know, maybe at the town hall coming up this weekend, that would be great. I think the language in here is good. If we were going back between the panels we talked about on agenda item 2, we were looking for language. There's some really good language in here, both in the vision statement. I think as long as it all matches up, I thought this turned out terrific. So thank you. I had a couple of walkability specific things for Mr. Shields. On the corner of Maple and Broad, as of this afternoon, the PED signal was stuck at the 14 countdown. And so I actually walked into traffic because I thought I was allowed to walk.
I got your message, and that was very alarming to hear. So I have forwarded that both to the police dispatch and to Public Works.
Okay.
And I don't have an update as of this minute.
Yeah, and someone else behind me did the same thing because they saw me walk, saw that it said walks, 14, thought it was the countdown to walk, and it was not.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. So hopefully we're on top of that. Further down.
This is not of interest for the immediate problem, but that signal is just needs to be completely rebuilt. And so in the budget that you're going to get on March 12th, there's going to be about a $100,000 line item to rebuild that entire signal.
And it's a busy intersection. It's got a toy store there, so there's families there all the time crossing that intersection. I spent a long time walking through the city today. The other is on Virginia and Broad. I know we have issues with those PED buttons, but the button's broken. It's one of those old-style ones that actually depress, and it's stuck. So, Virginia and Broad. And then on North Roosevelt, where we have all the construction going on with the street closure, so whether you're coming north or south, it'd be nice to tell people that the sidewalk's closed, because you basically walk and then you just stop and there's no place to cross on North Roosevelt, either way. No way to deter. You can't go up the hill in Oakwood. I ended up doing a loop around Oakwood and cutting through the cemetery. It's just good to warn people, especially as we think about that being a bit busy route for East Falls Church commuters. Another thing is I wanted council's input on this. I sent, I think the mayor, the school board chair, as well as Superintendent and Wyatt earlier, thoughts on a joint resolution regarding gun violence. I know our hands are fairly tied given where we are with the state, but it would be nice for us to make a stance that we'd like to see our state and federal legislators to take some action. I think we saw a great community turnout on Sunday, or yesterday. And so I would like us to consider doing some sort of proclamation or resolution to kind of call on our legislators. And I think the school board might want to join in on that. Something to consider. I think, unfortunately, we probably have lots of language that we've used before in various other gun violence prevention proclamations that we probably can borrow. But and again, while our hands are tied, and I think where we are in the General Assembly, I think it's still an important statement to make on what the City of Falls Church believes and stands for. And then on that note, March is also, besides being Women's History Month, also Child Abuse Prevention Month. And so like in previous years, I'd like us to have plans on a pinwheel garden and planting ceremony. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Remembered, tomorrow night is the ATA meeting where the budget is discussed. Is the manager and the superintendent presenting at that event? And what's the nature of what is presented?
I have been asked to attend, and so what I've done in the past is provide basically an update from what the council saw at your November retreat or November budget forecast, sort of the big picture. And so I haven't put the slides together yet, but that's what my approach has been in the past and what I think it will be tomorrow night.
So does your presentation include an explanation of the budget guidance that council offered late last year.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Other comments, questions, Mr. Lickenhouse?
Mr. Shields, what's the status of the Falls Church Arts Cafe at the Kensington?
Let me find out, and every time I ask, it's soon. And let me find out what the latest soon is.
Okay. And then I had a request last time. One of my neighbors, and there's concern for me too because my kids walked through that intersection, but the intersection of Oak and Seton by Thomas Jefferson. One of my neighbors had mentioned that there had been a study there previously about a way to make that safer, and I think she'd even referenced an intersection close to where you live in terms of tightening up the corners because of the amount of foot traffic that goes across that intersection. Do you guys have any update on that since my question last week?
I don't. So let me follow up on that.
Okay. She said someone had been out there previously, and I don't mean previously in the last week, meaning in recent history, to look at that intersection. And then finally, I recall in a meeting sometime since the beginning of the year that as part of this discussion related to the RFP, we were looking for some type of analysis or comparison on proffers between the history of proffers here in Falls Church versus surrounding jurisdictions, just so we could have a better lay of the land in terms of decision-making related to the RFP.
Yeah, that's in process. It's a fairly big effort, actually,
Yep,
to
I can
gather that
imagine.
data. And
It's tough to get, I would imagine, too.
But one important step in it is assembling the housing directors to talk about affordable housing proffers and how that's handled in the National Capital Region. The rest of them is just gathering the data. It's a fairly straightforward analysis in terms of what the dollar value of it is. But affordable housing can be quite complex in terms of how that's tallied up.
Okay, anything else? Vice Mayor Connolly?
The Budget and Finance Committee is hoping to meet as well. Our normal meeting date would be February 23rd, but we're not going to meet because of the Campus Coordinating Committee. Mr. Lickenhouse, there was a message today from Ms. Bawa about meeting on March 2nd, Friday, March 2nd. Are you available that day? At 8 o'clock.
In the morning?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could be.
8 o'clock is good for you? Okay. So that will be the next Budget and Finance Committee meeting.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? All right.
Where's the campus coordination meeting taking
It's a
place?
school board, isn't it?
School board conference room.
Okay.
All right, anything else? Let's
Mayor moves
adjourn.
adjourn.
Let's do it. All right, we're adjourned.